Ever wondered what dinner was like 2 centuries ago? Get ready to travel back in time with me as we explore 20 brutal dinner meals from 200 years ago that might just make your stomach turn. Number 20. Jellied eels.
So you're going to try some?
Let's dive into a dish that's both intriguing and quintessentially British. Jellied eels. Originating from the East End of London during the Victorian era, this dish might make some modern diners raise an eyebrow. It consists of chopped eels, boiled in a stock until tender. The mixture is then allowed to cool, causing the natural fats to set and form a jelly, which gives the dish its distinctive texture. Surprisingly, it's served cold. Eels were once abundant in the Thames River, making them a cheap, nutritious staple for London's working-class population. Pie and mash houses, where jellied eels were a common fare, proliferated in the 18th century. Even today, historic establishments like M. Mann's, which opened in 1902, continue to serve this traditional dish. However, the popularity of jellied eel has waned over the years. At the end of World War II, there were about 100 eel, pie, and mash shops in London. By 1995, this number had dwindled to 87. Today, while jellied eel can still be found in some London delicatessens and supermarkets, the dish's consumption has declined. Environmental changes have also impacted the availability of European eels, which are now critically endangered. Efforts by the Environment Agency have helped improve water quality in the Thames, making it viable for eel fisheries once again. Despite these efforts, the future of jellied eels remains uncertain due to conservation concerns. Number 19. Salop. Alright, let's talk about a drink that was all the rage in 18th and 19th century England. Salop. This was the go-to beverage when folks wanted to avoid splurging on expensive coffee and tea. Imagine that, a budget-friendly alternative brewed up right in the local shops. So, what was in it? Originally, Salop was made from Salop, a flour ground from orchid roots mostly sourced from Smyrna. Later, it got a makeover with sassafras, the same stuff that gives root beer its kick. Picture this, a warm cup of Salop mixed with milk and a dash of sugar, perfect for a chilly Victorian evening. Now, here's where things get spicy. Victorian doctors claimed Salop could treat STIs. Yep, you heard that right. After that revelation, suddenly everyone was too bashful to be seen sipping it in public. The Salop stalls in London gradually disappeared, making way for those trendy coffee joints we know today. But hey, Salop left its mark on history as a quirky yet beloved drink of its time. It's a reminder of how taste and trends evolve over centuries. Who knows, maybe one day we'll see a Salop come back in a hipster cafe near you. Number 18. Marbled veal. The concept of marbled veal dates at least from 1817, when Dr. William Kitchener included a recipe in Apicius Redivivus, or the Cook's Oracle. The dish takes its name from the swirly appearance of its slices, and in modern incarnations takes the texture of a terrine. It has a bright flavor for a terrine because it is bound with gelatin, as well as fat, and includes a dramatic dose of a flavored English flavoring, lemon zest. Our version is relatively inauthentic in omitting the tongue that is common to the older recipes. But out of practicality rather than preference, tongue has gotten hard to find, not a difficult recipe. Dr. Kitchener's marbled veal is a sort of ornate potted meat. He builds his version by grinding the tongue separately from the other meats, forming it into clumps and scattering them to create the marbling effect. Marbled veal is one of those rare recipes or other endeavors in which carelessness pays, as Dr. Kitchener explains in his version. Boil a neat's tongue till it is tender. Trim off all the fat and bones and cut the tongue into small pieces, and pound it in a mortar with 1/4 pound of butter till it is very fine. Pound the light quantity of dressed veal in the same way with pepper and salt and a little grated nutmeg. When the veal is pounded very fine, lay part of it in the bottom of a earthened pan. Tongue in lumps until the veal, not in any shapes, but the more careless the better, as it will look better than it is cut out. Then put another layer of the veal upon the tongue and press it down close. Cover it with clarified butter. Send it to the table cut into slices and garnished with sprigs of curled parsley. This is good prose, humorous and informative, from a time when culinary giants strode the streets of England, not unlike the 1970s. You could substitute nutmeg for the mace in the British food in the America version too. A later version from Eliza Leslie's Directions for Cookery, in its various branches, London 1840, is in fact another potted meat. She grinds, literally pounds, like Kitchener. We, however, have meat grinders and food processors.
Produced in Japan and prized for its rich marbling and buttery taste.
Cook veal and tongue separately and bind them with softened butter before putting distinct lumps of each mixture into a pot. It looks like she lifted the recipe from the oracle. You may, as she advises, use it for sandwiches. Number 17. Boiled calf head. Yep, believe it or not, this was considered quite the delicacy. According to a recipe in The Accomplished Cook, this was how you cook calf's head. Take a calf's head, cleave it, and take out the brains, skins, and blood about it. Then steep them and the head in fair warm water, the space of 4 or 5 hours. Shift them 3 or 4 times and cleanse the head. Then boil the brains and make a pudding with some grated bread, brains, some beef suet, minced small, and some minced dill and sage. Fill the head with this pudding, then close it up and bind it fast with some pack thread. Spit it and bind on the caul round the head with some of the pudding round about it. Roast it and save the gravy. Blow off the fat and put on the gravy. For the sauce, a little white wine, a sliced nutmeg, and a piece of sweet butter, the juice of an orange, salt and sugar. Then bread up the head with some grated bread, beaten cinnamon, minced lemon peel, and a little salt. Number 16. Broxy. If Broxy kind of rhymes with pox, it's purely coincidental. Or is it? Meat was pretty expensive during the Victorian era, but besides beans and eggs, it was the most readily available protein. Poor families who couldn't afford better cuts of meat bought Broxy from a butcher instead. Broxy was a butcher's term for any kind of meat, usually sheep, that had dropped dead of disease. Since sheep carried a lot of communicable diseases, including tetanus, salmonella, and ringworm, you'd probably drop dead too once you ate Broxy. Number 15. Pickled calf's foot. Noticing a weird obsession with strange parts of the animal, the Victorians might have been obsessed with opulence and appearance, but they were also famous for being thrifty. In the Victorian era, no part of the animal went to waste. Pickling meat is a way of curing and preserving different types of meat. This method was developed before the days of refrigeration or easy access to ice for keeping meats cold. Thus, we have pickled pig's feet, pickled herring, and other pickled meat, fowl, and fishes. Number 14. Water sushi. Water sushi is a fancy name for seafood water. To make water sushi, you go out fishing or look in your ice box and scrape together whatever seafood you can find. Throw it in a pot, boil it with a couple parsley roots, some old wine and vinegar if you have it, and voila, water sushi. A lot of the time, the soup ended up tasting a lot like mud, and a degree of caution was essential for consuming the dish, as the cooks rarely ever bone the fish. Number 13. Victorian Beer. In February 2020, a cache of 600 beer bottles was discovered below the staircase of what was once a Victorian brewery in Leeds, England. The bottles were found neatly stacked in the ancient remains of the Scarborough Castle Inn, which was part of Tetsley's Brewery established in 1822. According to Archaeological Services WIAS, the group responsible for the find, many of the bottles still contain liquid and were sent to a lab for analysis. At first, the bottle's contents were thought to be ginger beer, but the liquid was later confirmed to not only be alcoholic at 3% alcohol by volume, but also disturbingly toxic. The beer contained a high volume of lead at 0.13 milligrams per liter, which is well above the safe level of 0.01 milligrams per liter recommended by the World Health Organization.
Isn't it funny that here in the 18th century,
Archaeological Services WIAS notes that the high level of lead may be due to contamination from water being transported through lead pipes. David Williams, Senior Project Manager at Archaeological Services WIAS, told the Drinks Business that the bottles probably date to the late 19th century, perhaps the 1880s. Number 12. Offal. When we talk about offal, we're talking about some of the dishes your grandparents and great-grandparents probably survived on. Those are things like liver and onions, steak and kidney pie, tripe, and sometimes even brains. We don't really need to say why these fell out of fashion, right? They're absolutely not in line with almost anything in today's palate, and the idea of eating kidneys is just, well, gross. But offal was a staple during times when nothing went to waste and was popular more recently than you might expect. According to The Atlantic, there was a huge push during World War II to make eating offal standard American fare. Times were tight, meat was rationed, and a huge amount was going overseas to feed Allied troops. On the home front, the government recruited the help of social psychologists to help make offal more appealing to the masses. And it worked, kind of.
You really want to use this stuff soon, like a day or two after you buy it.
That's probably why your grandparents stirred kidneys into stews. But it's also likely that once we had abundant access to things like hamburgers and steak, we quickly abandoned the inner icky bits. Number 11. Pigeons. Pigeons were readily available in cities and were often served in pies or stews. Restaurants used to serve pigeon meat. In fact, so-called market hunters, men who killed wild game to sell it, killed the passenger pigeon to extinction in the early 20th century. The true sport hunters, the same as modern-day hunters, got together and forced the government to ban the practice of market hunting. The hunters had lawmakers pass laws against selling any wild game. That's why if you buy rabbit meat or catfish fillets, etc. in the grocery store, they are strictly farm-raised animals, not wild ones. They also set up the Pittman-Robertson program to preserve wildlands for hunting and other recreational purposes. They even imposed a tax on themselves, an excise tax on guns and ammunition, to pay for it. I've been around a long time, and the only people I've ever seen put their money where their mouths are when it comes to conservation are hunters and other sportsmen. Number 10. Suet pudding.
As part of a calorie-controlled diet.
A suet pudding is a savory dish made with suet, which is hard fat from around the kidneys of a sheep or cow, then flour and dried fruit. It would have been a filling and hearty meal. Scan through almost any 18th century cookbook and you'll find a recurring term, suet. Suet was an important ingredient in English cooking. It's still used today, though it seems to have reserved its spot on British grocery shelves, much more so than here in the United States. Suet is a special hard fat found in the loins of beef and sheep. As an ingredient, it fills the columns of the old cookbooks. It's an essential component in many traditional puddings, dumplings, crust, mince pie, sausage, haggis, and force meats and stuffings. It was used to create an airtight seal for potted meats and preserved fruits and vegetables. In its clarified state, it was used for deep frying, broiling, basting, and grilling. David Steele's 1795 book, The Shipmaster's Accountant, explains how sailors were issued flour, currants, and suet 1 day a week, Sunday, according to other texts, in lieu of their normal ration of beef.
It's top tier, grade A, best.
With these ingredients, the men would make plum duff, a simple boiled plum pudding. Suet had numerous non-culinary uses in the 18th century as well. Countless medicinal ointments used suet as a base ingredient. It was used as lamp oil, as well as in the production of soap and leather treatments such as dubbin and black ball. Maria Rundle, in her 1807 cookbook, The New System of Domestic Cookery, used suet in a couple recipes for pomatum, the 18th century version of pomade. She goes on to explain how suet can be used as a rust inhibitor on metal pots and utensils. Will Hayes, in his 1775 book, Valuable Secrets Concerning Arts and Trade, publishes a formula which uses suet for oil-based paint. And if you're ever concerned that someone may find out that you make your candles out of suet. Number 9. Head cheese. Head cheese, or brawn, is a cold-cut terrine, or meat jelly, that originated in Europe, perhaps ancient Germania. It is made with flesh from the head of a calf or pig, less commonly a sheep or cow, typically set in aspic, and usually eaten cold at room temperature or in a sandwich.
Beautiful. It's set perfectly. I'm really pleased with the way that is set. Now I've got myself.
Despite its name, the dish is not a cheese and contains no dairy products. The parts of the head used vary and may include the tongue, but do not commonly include the brain, eyes, or ears. Trimming from more commonly eaten cuts of pork and veal are often used, and sometimes the feet and heart, with gelatin added as a binder. Variations of head cheese exist throughout Europe and elsewhere, with differences in preparation and ingredients. A version pickled with vinegar is known as sauce. Historically, meat jellies were made of the head of an animal less its organs, which would be simmered to produce a naturally gelatinous stock that would congeal as the dish cooled. Meat jellies made this way were commonly a peasant food and have been made since the Middle Ages. Earlier brawns heavily featured spices and herbs, but beginning in the 18th century, the amount of seasoning was reduced. Contemporary brawn now features minimal spicing, usually sage and perhaps a little lemon juice. Head cheese recipes may also require additional gelatin, or more often need to be reduced to set properly. Just as disgusting as it sounds, or maybe not quite as disgusting as it sounds, depending on your frame of mind, head cheese is not actually a cheese at all.
Beautifully.
But meat taken from the heads of various animals such as sheep, cow, pig, or calf, which is then encased in that weird meat jelly, which is actually called aspic, along with various seasonings like onion, salt, and vinegar, black pepper, and others. The meat in head cheese, the name alone is unpleasant enough, isn't limited to head meat, but can also include meat from the heart, tongue, and feet of the animal as well. So essentially, you have random bits of meat from slightly uncommon parts of animals smooshed into that weird meat jelly stuff that's generally really unappealing to behold, and then seasoned with more traditional seasonings. As you can see from this picture, the head cheese itself is quite unusual to look at, having the appearance of a brick wall built by an amateur builder or some sort who used jelly instead of cement. Number 8. Calves' foot jelly. Wealthier families might enjoy jellies made from calves' feet. Calves' foot jelly has two forms: sweet, common in 19th century British and America, and savory, called petcha, a standard of Ashkenazi Jewish cooking. Both dishes start with a long braise of split cow's feet.
And here's the finished product.
comfort jelly.
The latter, for a sick room concoction, adds garlic, onion, salt, and pepper, and usually retains the meat that falls from the feet. The former, for a dessert, adds sugar, Madeira wine, brandy, cinnamon, and citrus, and discards the meat. In both cases, the stock is chilled until it sets, and the fat that rises to the top is skimmed. The key component to both is collagen, a protein found mainly in connective tissue in which feet abound. Collagen makes meat tough, but it also makes the same cut after stewing silky and rich. Smart cooks have long, big chicken feet from the butchers. They give chicken soup extra body. Hot collagen imparts richness. Chilled, it turns to gelatin. Number 7. Syllabuds. Today, the syllabub is rather an unfamiliar dessert, but from the 17th and early 20th centuries, it was a pudding staple. It has gone through some minor changes along its way, but its essence has remained the same. Originally, milk was sweetened and mixed with cider stack, a sweet fortified beer not unlike sherry, and left to curdle and treated as a drink served hot or cold. At the same time, a more solid version was being made with cream and wine and spirits.
We can cut it this way.
More recently, less alcohol and more cream was used, producing a dessert that could stand in a cool place that would remain delicious, soft, and fully whipped. This was known as an everlasting syllabub. The word syllabub comes from the name Silly, an area in the Champagne region of France that made the eponymously named wine, and the word bub, an Elizabethan slang word meaning a bubbling drink, hence silly bub, wine mixed with a frothy cream. In fact, it was a case of the frothier the better, and the best way to achieve this is to spray milk straight from the udder, which has a natural froth, into the wine. This kind of syllabub was also called hatted kit. Number 6. Pickled eggs. Eggs were preserved by pickling them in brine or vinegar. Pickled eggs can have a strong tart flavor and rubbery texture that might not be for everyone. You don't often see pickled eggs in meat today. They're icons of long-gone corner taverns, where a brandy, old-fashioned brandy was garnished with a pickled egg, and a blue-collar patron stopping on the way home from work ordered a pickled ham hock or egg with a beer to tide him over until dinner. Indeed, in some back corner of our minds, we all know that pickled eggs once existed.
Give it a good shake so that everything gets mixed up real good.
But unless you live in a special part of the globe where they still flourish, you probably can't recall exactly when they joined the dodo on Extinction Island. If you look hard enough, pickled eggs are, of course, still alive and well. Sorry, Mr. Dodo, you'll have to find something else to accompany your old-fashioned. In the States, a handful of companies such as the Porky Company of Wisconsin continue to produce them. But as a staple of the bar, they have become thin on the ground. Our romanticized version of the cocktail world tend to make us assume that this probably happened somewhere over the past century, either during Prohibition or the health craze of the 70s. Yet devotees have been lamenting their passing for some time. Number 5. Boiled sheep's eyes. Sheep's eyes were sometimes boiled and eaten. This is a food not commonly eaten today due to its unconventional nature. Maybe the eyes of other mammals are just a bit too close to home for most people. Fish eyes seem the most acceptable form of ocular cuisine, my fastidious soup-eating friend excluded. Number 4. Black pudding.
Done.
Looks beautiful, doesn't it?
Also known as black sausage, it is basically a sausage made by cooking the blood of an animal, usually pig, cow, sheep, or goat, with chicken and horse being used rarely, with filler, until it reaches a thickness where it can easily congeal when cooled. Filler to be cooked along with the blood might consist of any number of things, but is typically ingredients like fat, meat, potato, bread, oatmeal, suet, and various other agents that'll help to thicken the blood, but still prove some sort of taste or flavoring, as you can't just go and put solid blood into a sausage now, can you? Oh wait, you can! The blood sausage is generally served as part of a traditional breakfast in some areas of the United Kingdom and some Canadian provinces. Furthermore, the dish is also eaten all over Europe, with many regional variants coming into play. It is less common and even difficult to find in America, and blood sausage eating is usually confined to certain ethnic groups, whose tradition calls for the eating of blood sausage. Outside of North America, the blood sausage is surprisingly prevalent and popular, despite it really just being a sausage made from the cooked blood of a random animal. Blood puddings are often considered to be one of the oldest form of sausage. Animals are generally bled at slaughter, and as blood rapidly spoils unless prepared in some way, making a pudding with it is one of the easiest ways to ensuring it does not go to waste.
Egg. Look at that black pudding and white egg, like ebony and ivory.
While the majority of modern black pudding recipes involve pork blood, this has not always been the case. Sheep or cow blood was also used, and one 15th century English recipe used that of a porpoise in a pudding eaten exclusively by the nobility. Until at least the 19th century, cow or sheep blood was the usual basis for black puddings in Scotland. Jameson's Scottish Dictionary defined black pudding as a pudding made of blood of a cow or sheep. As a product of the slaughtering process, eating black puddings was historically associated with Martinmas, when the annual slaughter of the livestock took place. By the 19th century, black pudding manufacture was linked with towns known for their large markets of pork, such as Stretford in the Lancashire and Cork, Ireland. By this time, black puddings were generally omitted from recipe books aimed at urban housewives, as they no longer usually had access to home-killed pork, although recipes continued to appear in Scottish cookbooks until the 20th century. Number 3. Blange. Blange should be a simple affair: cream, milk, sugar, and almond extract set with gelatin. In the recipes from earlier than the 20th century, the gelatin would have been prepared in-house from calves' feet or pigs' trotters. There was an alternative setting agent called isinglass, which is made from the dried swim bladders of fish. By the way, the pronounced almond flavor of almond extract is not supposed to emulate that of regular almonds, but of bitter almonds, which were high in cyanide and therefore used in small, highly aromatic doses. Other things were sometimes added to this basic mixture: lemon zest, cinnamon, brandy, and rose water, all chopped up in recipes through the centuries. The blanche went rather downhill once you could buy it in packet form. The almond extract or bitter almonds were replaced with almond flavoring, and instead of gelatin, corn flour was used. This is the dessert that many people hate. Number 2. Tapioca pudding. Before dessert consisted of cake pops and extravagant ice creams, there was tapioca pudding, a pudding combining milk or cream, or a vegan substitute, and tapioca, a starchy extract from a cassava plant.
And enlisting Bill Cosby as a sponsor, it wasn't enough to pull its failing brand out of a tailspin.
While the pudding has been around for longer, the Minute Tapioca Company was formed in Boston in the late 1800s, popularizing the dessert. Since tapioca pudding is not as popular anymore, tapioca can commonly be found as tapioca pearls in boba tea, a beverage created in Taiwan in the 1980s. There's a good chance you forgot that tapioca pudding is even a thing, right? The pre-made stuff comes in a tube-like container from the refrigerated section of a grocery store, and it regularly gets passed over these days in flavor of more popular snacks like Greek yogurt. You can even find it on the shelves with the individual packets of Jell-O and pudding, but it's usually on the top shelf collecting dust. And even that packaged stuff doesn't hold a candle to the homemade kind that Grandma used to make. So, what happened? It's not entirely clear, but culinary historians and genealogists over at Aunt Lil's Kitchen have recreated some of the recipes from the era before pre-packaged convenience food and suggest starch-made tapioca fell from popularity because it was a time-consuming and rather difficult process. We may have made it easier by just opening a package, but with that, we've given up delicious, comforting homemade goodness. It's just not the same.
Coconut, shredded coconut that we've pan-fried to make it nice and toasty.
According to one writer for the New York Times Magazine, it probably fell out of favor for two reasons: most chefs' inability to cook it to proper consistency, and the disgusting associations made with it when it tasted at an improper consistency. Unfortunately, improper cooking was all too common, which is why the pudding earned the nickname fish-eyed pudding. With a nickname like that, it's no wonder people stopped eating it. Number 1. Turtle soup. Today, we typically just see turtles swimming in lakes, streams, and oceans. But throughout the 1800s, turtles also swam in a meaty broth, resulting in a long-forgotten dinner, turtle soup. The gravy-like soup was even U.S. President William Howard Taft's favorite food. The soup began to wane in popularity by the 1960s, although it's still served regionally in parts of the country. Turtle soup is one of those foods that has almost passed out of memory. Our tastes have changed, but as recently as half a century ago, tourists in Florida could still be served the stuff, along with turtle steaks and even turtle burgers. Green sea turtles from the Caribbean, named for their green-tinged fat, were the source of this meat for centuries. Overharvesting disseminated their population, and today it's illegal to harm or kill them. Today, most Europeans and Americans would perhaps find turtle soup exotic and objectionable, writes scholar Meibo Ching. But 3 centuries ago, turtle soup was the food of European elites dining off the fruits of colonialism. The English aristocracy slurped it up as early as the 1720s. By the middle of the 18th century, turtle soup was a haute cuisine. This status maker of aristocracy and colonial power began to be accessible to the middle classes via civic banquets sponsored by London mayors. From Britain, the craze spread to the continent and North America. Ching writes, the very term turtle soup became synonymous with deliciousness in English literature. And that wraps up our journey into 20 brutal dinner meals from 200 years ago. If you enjoyed this trip back in time, make sure to check out our other videos for more fascinating insights into history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. Thanks for watching.